Hello students, welcome to today's class. Our topic for today is classification of crops. Now globally, major crop classifications are defined by the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, of the United Nations. For a better understanding of agricultural crops and their distribution in Nigeria and the globe, knowledge of the classification of plants and crops is needed. So in this lesson, we will discuss about the classification of crops. And by the end of the lesson, you should be able to classify crops based on their uses. You should also be able to classify crops based on their life cycle. That's when we talk about life cycle, we're talking about from the time of sowing the plants to the time they are matured and harvested. So we also look at how crops are classified based on their life cycle. And lastly, we look at the classification of crops based on morphology. So starting with the classification of crops based on their uses. We'll look at cereal crops. Now, what are cereal crops? These are crops that belong to the grass family and they provide carbohydrates. Now, examples of cereal crops, we have maize, rice, millet, guinea corn, wheat, barley, oats. So these are examples of crops that are cereals. We also have crops that are called pulses. So we're looking at crops based on their use. So pulses are crops that are rich in protein. They are rich sources of protein. Remember we said cereals is for carbohydrate, rich source of carbohydrate. Now we're talking about pulses, which are also called grain legumes. They are rich sources of protein. Examples of such crops, we have the cowpea, soya bean, groundnut, lima beans, pigeon pea. Now we have, based on their uses, we have roots and tubers, crops that are called roots and tubers, and these crops produce tubers under the ground which help to provide carbohydrates. So they are rich sources of carbohydrates, just as cereals. So they are used to provide us with carbohydrates. Examples of such crops, we have cassava, yam, cocoyam, sweet potato, beets, carrots. Now, we have another class of crops based on their use, referred to as vegetable crops. They help to provide us with vitamins and minerals. And examples of such vegetable crops are amaranthus, as Amaranthus spinosus, then onions, which is called Allium cepa, the botanical name. We have okra, Ebemuscus esculentus, which is the botanical name for okra. We have cauliflower, these are vegetables. We have spinach. We have spinach is Amaranthus caudatus. We have bitter leaf, Vernonia amygdalina, which is also a vegetable crop. And we have water leaf, Talinum triangulaire. These are examples of vegetable crops. Now, fruit crops, based on their uses, we have crops that are referred to as fruit crops. They help to provide us with vitamins and minerals as well, just as vegetables also. Now, we have the orange, Citrus sinensis, or citrus species, because we have different types of species of orange. Banana, Musa species. We have pineapple. We have mango, Mangifera indica. We have pawpaw, Carica papaya. We have cashew. We have, you can see those are examples. There are so many other fruits, but just a few examples of fruits, crops. Now we also have beverage crops. These are crops that help to provide us with food drinks when they are processed. And examples of such crops are cocoa, Theobroma cacao. We have coffee. We have tea, kola nuts. We have another set of crops which are classified based on their uses as spices, and these are crops that add flavor to our stew or soups. They also help to provide us with vitamins and minerals. And examples of such crops is ginger, the botanical name is Zingiber officinale. We have pepper, that's Capsicum annum. We have onions, Allium cepa. We have curry, have nutmeg. These are examples of crops that are referred to as spices. We also have crops that are referred to as oil crops. Based on their use, they help to provide us with oil, and when they are processed, they help to provide us with oil. Examples of such crops are oil palm, Elias guinensis, which is a botanical name. We have groundnut, Arachis hypogea. Melon, we have coconut, Cocos lucifera. We also have soya bean. These are cotton. So these are examples of oil crops. Now we also have crops that are referred to as fiber crops that are used for making clothing materials, ropes, and bags. We have cotton, which is also a fiber crop. So cotton is an oil crop and also a fiber crop. We have sisal. We have kenna, hemp. Now we also have crops referred to as latex crops. We're talking about classification of crops based on their uses. So we have crops that are called latex crops that help to provide some white sticky liquid used in the plastic industry. So we have rubber, okay, which is a latex crop. Now let's look at the classification of crops based on their life cycle. Now we've looked at the classification of crops based on their uses. So now let's take a look at the classification of crops based on their life cycle. That is how long they live from the time they are cultivated or sown into the soil to the time they grow, mature, produce their fruits and die, or after harvesting they die. So that's the life cycle. So let's look at certain crops. We have annual crops. These are crops that grow and mature within 1 year. And examples of such crops are maize, rice, cowpea, millet, vegetables, cotton, groundnut. We have the biennial crops. These are crops that grow and mature within 2 years. Some examples are pepper, ginger, cassava. We have perennials. These are crops that grow and mature in more than 2 years. Examples of such crops are tree crops especially. We have cocoa, banana, orange, oil palm, and rubber to mention a few. We also have ephemerals, which are crops that mature within several times within one season. That means they use few weeks to complete their life cycle. They are called ephemerals, but it was not captioned here, but I've mentioned it for us to also take note of that. Now let's look at the classification of crops based on morphology. So when we talk about morphology, we're talking about the physical character features, the external features of our crops or plants. So we have, based on morphology, we have two types of classifications here. We have dicotyledonous plants and monocotyledonous plants. So what are dicotyledonous plants? These are plants that bear seeds which have two seed leaves or cotyledons. Now examples of such crops are the mango, the orange, the cowpea, the groundnut. And one of the easy ways to know or identify a dicot plant is from their seeds. There are other ways, but commonly one can easily discover or identify a dicot plant from the seeds. If you have seen a mango seed, you can see that it can be divided into two, same as the orange seed, same as cowpea, which is our beans, same as groundnut. So those are dicotyledonous plants. They have two seed leaves. Then we also have what is called monocotyledonous plants. These are plants that have only one seed leaf or cotyledon. Example, the maize, rice, oil palm, sugarcane, guinea grass. Now, I said you can use the seeds, but there are other features that can be used. The leaves can be used, the roots can be used to discover or identify a monocot or distinguish a monocot from a dicot. Using the seeds for the maize plant, remember the maize seed cannot be divided into two, same as rice. It cannot be easily divided into two. When I use the word easily, with your fingers. You cannot easily divide it into two. But when it comes to the beans, cowpea, soya bean, groundnuts, you cannot. Groundnuts, cowpea, mango, they can easily be divided, you know. So that is a guide. So back to our monocotyledonous plants, we have examples as maize, rice, oil palm, sugarcane, guinea grass, etc. Okay. Now let's look at the differences between monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. The first we have is that they possess monocotyledons possess only one seed leaf, as I mentioned earlier, and the seed leaf is also known as a cotyledon. So the picture helps us to see the um, the internal organs of the seed, which tells us that this is a monocotyledonous seed. Then the dicot, you can see it possesses two seed leaves. It can be divided into the two cotyledons. You can see these are the two cotyledons. For the monocot, it has a single cotyledon. For the dicot, it has two cotyledons. Still on the differences between monocot and dicot, we have the fibrous root system. The monocot has a fibrous root system. Okay? You can see the type of root system it has. So many roots are protruding from in the monocot. So we have these roots do not develop from the radicle. Now in a seed, we have the plumule and we have the radicle. Now the seeds, the radicle is a part of the seed from where the roots develop. For fibrous roots, they do not develop from the radicle of the seed. But for tap roots, which is for dicots, they develop from the radicle of the seed. Look at this. We have the taproot. You can see this is the taproot system, and this is typical of the dicotyledonous plants. Another difference is between the monocotyledons and dicotyledons is that monocotyledons exhibit hypogeal germination, while dicotyledonous plants exhibit epigeal. Now, what does this mean, epigeal germination? Hypogeal germination, you can see that the cotyledons remains within the soil as the plumule or the young seedling germinates. As the plumule develops into a shoot. Remember I said a seed has a plumule and a radicle. The plumule develops to become the shoot, while the radicle develops to become the root. So from this seed here, we have what is called the embryo. In the embryo, we have the plumule and the radicle. The plumule will now develop to become the shoot, which is this, while the radicle will develop to become the root. Now, when this cotyledon remains in the soil, that type of germination is called hypogeal germination. And for epigeal, and it takes place in monocotyledons, while for dicotyledons, they exhibit epigeal germination. This is where the cotyledon is brought out of the soil. The picture helps us to understand. See the seed that's sown. It's trying to germinate. It's still trying to germinate at this point. You can see the hypocotyl. And this is the cotyledon. Now, this tells us that the cotyledon is brought out of the soil here at this point, and see them. These are the cotyledons. These are the cotyledons. So this point above this withered, shrunk cotyledon is called the epicotyl, while the point below is called the hypocotyl. It's called the what? Just below the cotyledon. It's called the hypocotyl. See here for the monocots, you can see the hypocotyl here, while this point is the epicotyl. For the dicots, this point is the hypocotyl, while this point is the epicotyl, while these are the cotyledons. But this type of germination is actually called epigeal germination. So for the monocots, they exhibit hypogeal germination, while the dicotyledons exhibit epigeal germination. Now, another difference between monocots and dicots can be seen in the type of venation they possess on their leaves. Now, you can see these lines. There are certain lines on this leaf, which is called veins. So it's venation, parallel venation, parallel venation. While for dicotyledons, you can see it's netted, it's scattered. These are veins. So this is the midrib, this is the vein, this is the veinlets. You can see them all scattered. This is called net venation, while for monocot it's called parallel venation. So that's another difference. So when you see a plant, take a look at the leaves. You can use that as another guide to place that plant or to classify that plant either as a monocot or a dicot. So you can use the seeds, you can use the roots, you can also use the leaves, the venation, the veins, the arrangement of the veins on the leaves. Okay. Now we have vascular bundles, which are found in the stem of our plants. Now, when you take a look at the vascular bundles in a monocotyledonous plant, you can see that the bundles are scattered. This picture helps us to have that illustration. While for dicotyledonous plants, you can see that the vascular bundles are arranged. Now, the vascular bundles contains the phloem, xylem. These are tissues through which nutrients, minerals can pass through to move from one point to the other in the plants. So these vascular bundles are arranged when it comes to dicotyledonous plants, while for monocotyledonous plants they are scattered. So that's another difference between monocots and dicots. Another difference between monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants are monocots they do not undergo secondary growth, while dicots undergo secondary growth. Now, it's good for us to understand what this secondary growth means. Now, we understand that monocots do not undergo secondary growth, while dicots do undergo secondary growth. Now, this is growth that results from cell division in the cambia. Now, you know that this is the cambia of the plant. You know, after you remove the bark, you get to see the cambium or the cambia. Now, this is growth that results from cell division in the cambia or lateral meristem, and this causes the stems and roots to thicken. So that's called secondary growth. We also have primary growth. That's a growth that occurs as a result of cell division at the tips of stems and roots, causing them to elongate. So there are certain growths that cause the stem to thicken, that's to get thicker, and there are certain growths that cause the stem to elongate, that's to grow longer. So secondary growth is a growth that causes the stem of our plants to thicken, to become thicker, while primary growth is a growth that causes the stems and roots of plants to elongate. So from this picture, you can see the same growth. So you can see we have the primary phloem, xylem. This first part are the primary. Then this second part from here gives us the secondary xylem, secondary phloem, and all of this growth, this direction, is what is actually called the secondary growth. Okay. So in this lesson, we classified crops based on their uses, and we looked at cereals, legumes, vegetables, roots and tubers, fruits, spices, fibers, and latex. These are crops that were classified based on their uses. So crops can be classified based on their uses in this way. We also looked at classifying crops based on their life cycle as annual crops, biennial crops, and perennial crops. And we also classified crops based on their morphology, where we looked at monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. So thank you so much for your time. So we're going to take a look at some questions. The first question we have here is, which of the following crops is dicotyledonous? Now, we have the options here as Z maize, which is maize, Oryza sativa, which is rice, Elias guinensis, which is all palm, Vigna ingriculata, which is cowpea. Now, we've mentioned maize, which is a cereal, rice, which is a cereal, Eleaginensis, which belongs to the the grass family. So they fall under the grass family. Then we have Vigna ingriculata, which is a legume. Now, cereals are crops that usually have parallel venation, like maize, if you've seen a maize plant, while leguminous plants are plants that have netted venation. And parallel venation are crops that are monocots. So all of these Z-maize, oryza, sativa, and Eleaginensis are monocots. While Vigna ingriculata, which is a leguminous crop, beans, cowpea is a dicot. So the answer is Vigna ingriculata, which is cowpea. Now, crops which grow and mature within few weeks of their cultivation are called, remember, this has to do with classification of crops based on life cycle. We talked about it. I talked about annuals, biennials, and perennials. So annuals complete their life cycle in 1 year, biennials in 2 years, perennials in 2 or more years, while ephemerals, as I mentioned while I was teaching, I mentioned crops that complete their life cycle in a few weeks are called ephemerals. So this should be the answer, ephemerals. So I would advise you go through some other questions and explore so that you can evaluate your level of understanding. Thank you.